Selling your veterinary practice can feel like navigating a maze. One wrong step in legal, financial, or operational planning can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. What if a lot of the confusion comes from not really knowing what buyers value, or how your corporate structure and agreements quietly affect your bottom line? Welcome back to the Veterinary Business Podcast. I'm your host, Don Adeesha, and today we are diving into a topic where every veterinary owner needs to understand: how to know the true value of your practice and prepare for a successful sale. To discuss this joining us is Jordan Morelli, LLB, BCom, Toronto office lead at LINMAC LLP, a corporate lawyer and business strategist with over a decade of experience helping veterinarians, healthcare professionals, as well as private practice owners navigate the complex transactions while keeping solutions practical and business oriented. Now, Jordan works with clinic owners on mergers and acquisitions, commercial agreements, corporate governance, and tax-efficient planning. And he's passionate about helping veterinarians maximize the value of their practice while protecting their team, clients, and legacy. Today, we're diving into his session, Stop Guessing Your Practice's Value, Know What Buyers Really Pay For. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Don. Thanks for having me. How about I tell you a little bit about myself?
Okay.
You had a great introduction there. I'll just briefly tell you a little bit about my background. I've been acting for veterinarians and veterinary clinics for the last almost 15 years now. It sounds like it's time to update that bio. It's been almost 15 years. I initially gained a veterinary association as my client, and then their members started calling me, and I've never looked back. Veterinarians, veterinary clinics, I'm their general counsel. They call me when there's a legal issue, and I help navigate them through it. Doesn't matter what it is. Anything from incorporation to agreements, employment, leases, buy or sell a practice, banking, that sort of thing. I help with it. So we work across Canada. We've got offices in Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver. You'll see me at all the sort of major shows across Canada. So a little bit about me, and the firm, as I mentioned, is a cross Canada firm that helps business owners. So here we are.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. The right person, absolutely the right person to talk about this topic. Really glad you're here, Jordan. Now, if I am approaching retirement and considering selling my practice, but the process feels overwhelming, what is the first step I should take?
Yeah, good question, Don. I think the first step is to come up with a plan. That's often the first step of many things, and this is no exception to that. So come up with a plan. What does that look like? So that means you need to meet and hire your team. And the team is more than just lawyers. It is your accountant, your broker, your valuator, your commercial real estate agent, and even your financial advisor for after the transaction's done. And you're going to look for either recommendations in the marketplace, or you're going to assess your team based on a few qualities, that being culture, fit, and what the partnership looks like. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say you need to come up with a plan and hire your advisors is because the advisors in this space do this for a living. I do this for a living day in and day out. I help veterinarians and veterinary clinics. Often the sale transaction is the single largest transaction of a veterinarian's career, probably more so than buying a home. So, you have to have the right advisors in your court to really ensure that you get the best outcome for you and your team. So a large part of my role is education. I enjoy it very much. I enjoy sitting and sort of explaining the process and that sort of thing, and making sure that my clients feel at ease. And really, it's once we've got the plan, then again, you need to assess culture, and make sure that your values align. So, anyways, that's step one, and we'll talk about the rest of the sale process coming up.
That's right. So, how can you give us some advice on the best way to really select the right advisors?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think you sort of reach out to one individual in the market. Say, for example, you've got an accountant that you've worked with for a great period of time that sort of specializes in veterinary clinics, then he or she would likely have a list of advisors, or vice versa. You work with me, I have a list of advisors that I would recommend because I work with them day in and day out and understand what they're about. And then it's really a meet and greet. And again, it's like culture, fit, partnership. That's what you're assessing them on. And but beyond that, it's really in here. I mean, you really have to, it's sort of in your heart what fits. This is a large and stressful endeavor, so it also has to fit as well. So it's knowledge of the industry that you're looking for. You're looking for recommendations, and you're looking for sort of what feels right.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned over there assessing your own culture and the quality of your own staff, perhaps. Is that what you alluded to, or did I miss something there?
Yeah, I'd say culture is sort of what values you have. So, for
Okay.
example, I mean, at the firm, we stand by our core values, and really, it is the partners at the firm that enlisted those core values. So, I would imagine as a practice owner, the practice's values are probably the owners as well, and it's
Mm-hmm.
really standing by those values. And ours are, accountability, integrity, and humility. And I look for that in any third party I work with. But really in this type of scenario, I get brought in because often I find clinic owners have worked with, say, their brother-in-law or whatever, who's a commercial real estate lawyer, or a real estate lawyer that doesn't really do clinic purchases. And when it turns into a large transaction, then often one goes to a professional that focuses on it. So that's where I come in. So once I come in, then I recommend others, you assess and go from there.
Got it. So even during moments where you're selling your practice, you really should take culture into consideration because why actually? You're like washing your hands off of the practice. Why are we considering culture here?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, and it really goes into, your team, and it really, you have to consider your practice. Now, when you sell your practice, you're really still going to be part of it, because in a sale transaction, there's different types of sale transactions. I shouldn't assume, but in a typical sale transaction, it's going to go one of two ways: either a veterinarian or a team of veterinarians are going to buy your clinic, and it would be sort of, owner to associate transition, very traditional transition, or you'd sell to corporate. And corporate is sort of a newer concept over the last decade or so, and you sort of come in and sell to a big, either Canadian or international organization that owns multiple clinics. And in that, I mean, really, you have to assess their culture in the sense of, does it mesh with yours? And why I say that is because, well, there's a number of reasons. Number one, you're going to be tied to that clinic. Certainly, if you sell to corporate, the minimum term that you will be tied to it post-closing will be 3 years. So if you're going to be working with these folks for 3 years thereafter, you have to ensure that their values line up with yours. Often beyond that, the sale is conditional on your employees, which I think we'll touch on later, staying on. And if, often you're hiring your employees and you're assessing their values in conjunction with your own. So you'd want to ensure that their values line up with corporate culture, because otherwise, if those employees are, say, veterinarians, for example, and those veterinarians choose not to stay on at closing, that could be a problem. And then final reason would be often there's like a post-closing what's called an earnout, and that's a technical term, and that is like a bonus payment after closing. So you want to ensure that the clinic continues to be successful, especially if there's a bonus post-closing.
Check. So now, how do you sell a practice in a way that gets the price you deserve while still protecting your team, keeping your clients loyal, and ensuring that the legacy you worked so hard to build actually lives on after you step away?
Yeah, good question, Don. And we touched on that a little bit there. I think you have to meet the purchaser, and that's step one there. So you've got the plan, you've got your advisors at this stage, meet the purchaser. And the question is, as I mentioned, is the purchaser an individual veterinarian, or is it a corporate conglomerate that is coming in and sort of purchasing clinics? And if it's an individual veterinarian or corporate conglomerate, I mean, you assess on the same three principles: culture, fit, and partnership. So again, coming in, ensuring that the individual or the corporation purchasing your clinic shares those same values is extraordinarily important. Meet them, meet their team, speak to them, speak to others in the marketplace. Often veterinarians stay in touch with their classmates, like have their classmates sold to corporate or transition their business to another individual vet. What about others in the community? Speak to their advisors. Their advisors have lots of experience with what works, what doesn't, what have we seen, what has gone well, what's not gone so well. And I mean, protecting your team, keeping your clients loyal, again, it comes down to those values. It comes down to culture. If you pair up with a corporation that has your same values and continues it on in the future, that ensures your legacy.
Absolutely. Getting feedback from your peers, as well as, of course, when you have that cultural fit and you can really forecast perhaps, that your clients will stay on with the new owners. Now, what about for the veterinarians that are concerned about how much of the purchase price that they'll retain after tax? What tax strategies should they be considering, and when should these be implemented?
Yeah, good question. The tax tail wags the dog in this case. So every transaction, you need to start with tax. And this is, we have a tax team at LINMAC, and that's absolutely the starting point with everything. So you need to start planning ahead, and that's 2.5 years prior to sale. You have to start thinking about this. Why 2.5 years? Well, number one, there's a test. There's a test in the Income Tax Act, and if you're going to maximize your tax, the cash in your jeans post-closing, cash in your pocket post-closing, you have to do a reorganization 2 years or more in advance. And the reason I say 2.5 years is if you don't have the right advisors, it takes a while, as I mentioned, to interview them, to hire them, and for them to come up with a plan and implement it. And then you want to have that plan in place 2 years prior to sale. So a basic tax strategy would look something like every individual in Canada has what's called a Lifetime Capital Gains Exemption. And that allows every individual to sell a certain amount of their business tax-free if their business is set up properly. And the tax savings, that means that they can sell in today's dollars 1.25 million tax-free, and the rest of the purchase price would be taxed. But that's a pretty major savings. You don't save the entirety of the 1.25 million, you save tax on that amount. So it ends up being, a few $100,000. And that's a pretty big deal. You would layer planning on top of that. That would be a little bit more advanced. So say, for example, for a higher purchase price, that would be step one, your lifetime capital gains exemption. Then we'd look at a more complicated model, perhaps bring in some family members and do what's called pooling of that capital gains exemption. So if you're in a family of four, for example, you'd have that exemption 1.25 million times four. And then all of a sudden, we're talking about real tax-free money. That's material, life-changing money that you can then take and invest. And at a rate of return of, say, 7% per year, that can be a material amount of money in a few years, which, you can enjoy or leave to your kids or do whatever else you want with retirement. And then there's much more unique structures for even more advanced and higher sale prices.
Jordan, so that 1.25 million, that's per person per lifetime, or okay?
Yeah, so it actually it's per person, and what happens is often, but not always, they increase that with inflation. In fact, they're talking about increasing it now. A few years ago, it was under a million. Then it was pushed over to 1.25. They're actually talking about increasing it again. And so what ends up happening is if you utilize that now, you'll be able to utilize the delta in the future between whatever the rate is at that time and what you use now. So it actually, if someone used it in the 90s, they probably have a lot of tax-free room that they can still sell their shares at today.
Oh, got it. Now, Jordan, what is a letter of intent, and should a veterinary practice owner who's considering selling get one?
Yeah, that's a great question, Don. Earlier in my career, I often skipped the letter of intent, and now I always insist on it. And the letter of intent is really simple. It is just a 1 or 2 page letter that has no legal terms. It has a couple, but it's just the business terms. And it's like, what are the business terms that the parties agreed on? And do they have a meeting of the minds? So, you start with the letter of intent, and it's just a general letter, or sometimes it's called a memorandum of understanding. And literally, it's what have the vendor and the purchaser discussed in terms of the business terms. And then you write it down on a piece of paper, or on a letter in this case, and both parties sign it. It's not binding except for a few terms in that letter. So you'd insert things like purchase price, what are the payment terms, and other things like, I mentioned earnout earlier. Is there a bonus after closing for hitting certain targets? Is the current owner, the vendor, going to stay on and work for a period of time? If that's the case, what are their employment terms? Are they staying on for 3 years? How much are they earning per hour? What are their restrictive covenants? So those are like a non-competition, non-solicitation covenant, and that sort of thing. So you put all of that into a letter. And then I said it did have a few legal terms. Those would be confidentiality. And you sign it. It's only a few pages, and off you go. The benefit is that it is cheap and cheerful. It is not expensive, and you can ensure that the vendor and the purchaser have a meeting of the minds. And because you'd be surprised where you didn't, you're into the transaction and then you're sort of spending real money on the purchase agreement and on the ancillary documents. And something comes up that you didn't consider. And then all of a sudden the parties don't have a meeting of the minds. And it becomes expensive because you spent a bunch of professional fees. So it's always good to have that letter of intent.
How long does it usually take for one to get drafted? And like, what's the best practice about, creating one?
Yeah, so often I'll send clients a list. Again, there's no standard template for a letter of intent. It is literally as many or as few business terms. I like to be thorough. I like to put more in there. Because again, before all the lawyers are involved and all the professionals, it's a lot easier and when everybody's excited, it's a lot easier for the vendor and the purchaser to just get together and chat. And the more things you hammer out, the better. And the more that's in there, the better. So I like to be thorough, but it's not a lengthy process. And honestly, I'll send clients a list of 10 items to consider. And sometimes the answer is, I don't know, and we'll sort that out later. And that's okay. And then once they have that back to me, we can turn it around in 24 hours typically.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. That's amazing. And that's great that you have a template to really start off, the meeting of the minds, because it's true. You might get started with great intentions, with great excitement. And the moment you come across a roadblock way, way, way down the line, it'll be very tough for you to backpedal and figure things out. So let's do that from the get-go.
Yeah, especially once that purchase agreement's signed, because a letter of intent is not a purchase agreement. Those are two different concepts. A purchase agreement is a binding document. It contains a whole bunch of legal terms in it, and it's long. But once the purchase agreement's signed, there's no turning back unless there's a condition that's not been satisfied, similar to the purchase of a house. Sometimes there's a financing condition in there. If that's not satisfied, okay, you can sort of walk it back. But other than that, a purchase agreement is binding. A letter of intent is not. It's really just, again, a reflection of what have the parties agreed on. So you test the waters, you have a meeting of the minds, and then you provide the letter of intent to the lawyers and they draft a definitive purchase agreement.
Now, before we move on to the next question, I want to take a quick moment to speak to practice owners who know that they should be getting more from their marketing. A lot of veterinary clinics are doing all the right looking things, but they are posting on social media, running ads, updating their website, asking for reviews. But the results still feel a bit inconsistent. New clients are not coming in predictably. The phones are not ringing enough, and no one is fully sure what is actually driving growth. That uncertainty is expensive because when your marketing lacks strategy, you don't just lose on visibility, you lose bookings, you lose momentum, and you end up wasting time and budget on activities that are not moving the business forward. This is where we offer a complimentary marketing strategy meeting through the Veterinary Business Institute. You'll sit down with Lila, a veterinary marketing strategist who has worked with hundreds of clinics, and together you will look at your current marketing through a business growth lens. By the end of the session, you'll have clarity on what is actually driving results in your clinic right now, insight into the hidden gaps that might be costing you appointments, and a sharper understanding of your online presence and client journey, along with a customized 6-month growth roadmap to help you attract the right clients and grow more predictably. So this is not just a conversation, it is a working session designed to give you practical direction. And if you've been feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or unsure where to focus next, this is a great place to start. So go ahead and book your complimentary strategy session at veterinarybusinessinstitute.com/MSM. That's Veterinary Business Institute, one word, .com/MSM. Availability is limited each month, so if this sounds useful, we recommend claiming your spot while openings are available. Now, let's get back to the episode. So, Jordan, how should our veterinary practice owners manage employees through the sales process? If the transaction is conditional on employees accepting employment with the purchaser, how is that typically managed?
Yeah, this is a good one, Don, because employees are human beings, and you can control a lot about this process, but you can't control other human beings, especially employees. And in this case, or in certain cases, depending on who the employees are, some of them can be very fundamental to the transaction. So if you've got, say, six associates, for example, the purchaser may have a condition in the purchase agreement that has those six associates required to stay on. And it can be a bit stressful. So I'm actually going through this now. We're selling a business, and we've got probably about 100 to 150 employees. And it's we're going to be rolling out the employment agreement. So we're just at this stage. And, it is stressful, but it doesn't have to be totally unpredictable. And there's a great way to approach it. So number one is, at first, do not mention the sale to your employees. Don't mention it until it is time to mention it. And what does that mean? It means that in the letter of intent stage, and even while the purchase agreement is being drafted, you're going to stay hush and mum about this transaction. And that's because anything can happen and the transaction may fall apart. At that point, once the purchase agreement is signed, you'd look to your advisors, either your lawyer, or if you're selling to corporate, they would have a full integration team that they would bring in on this basis and talk to your employees. But it's important that you talk to them first. And again, it's important that you, if you're staying on, let them know that you're staying on. Don't call it a sale where you're exiting. Call it a graduation, that you'll still be part of the clinic, and it's just transitioning from 1.0 to version 2.0 type idea. Talk to them and meet with them personally, and ensure, as part of the purchase agreement, that the purchaser is obliged to employ all employees on the same or better terms. And that ensures that the employees are not going to be looking at these agreements and saying, my wage is being cut, my vacation's being cut, my benefits are being cut. So if they're getting a better deal out of this, and you've met with them and you've expressed that the corporation has a similar culture, then all of a sudden it's a very, very sellable and practice, and your employees will want to sign those agreements.
That's right. Now, you mentioned earlier on for us to not discuss this with the employees when we're even at the MOU or even past the purchase agreement until things are, done and dusted, really. But you mentioned something really key over here: to talk to them first. Ensure that you're the one delivering the news first, and also meet them personally. So, Jordan, if you don't mind, do you have any kind of story related to when this didn't go down as smoothly as, it was intended to?
Yeah, I mean, where to start? I mean, employees are unpredictable. And honestly, there's been a number of situations where I wouldn't say it's frequent, but it has happened. You do enough transactions, it has happened. You're at sort of the eve of close, and it's like, what's going on with associate A? He or she has not signed the agreement. And honestly, it is really it often comes down to a personal touch. Again, a personal meeting, the values, going through the employment terms and ensuring they understand it, giving them time to review the agreement and giving them time to seek independent legal advice if they want. And, what the other thing that can happen too is you're on the eve of closing, and this has happened, is like, oh boy, we just as part of the agreement, you have to disclose how many employees you have, of course, and what the terms are. And at times, there have been clients that have come to me on the eve of closing and said, oh boy, we forgot about the receptionist who's been on sick leave for the last decade. She's actually technically still an employee. She has not been terminated. We've been very good to her. She actually is a client of the clinic, but we never technically terminated her. So that is another challenging situation on the other end of the spectrum. Because in that case, it really would be up to the vendor to ensure that the employee is terminated prior to the sale and treated fairly. But that would sort of rest with the vendor. And so the moral of the story there is like, ensure you go through your employee list and go through historical lists to make sure that nobody is sort of overlooked, so to speak, because I'll tell you, the night before closing, dealing with that is very stressful.
Absolutely. And if you do have an employee who has been on sick leave for the past 10 years, that might also be a very interesting situation you got yourself into. Now, we hear a lot about non-competes and non-solids. So how do these actually work in a sale, and are they enforceable? If so, how?
Yeah, Don, good question. So these are called restrictive covenants. So there's non-compete, non-competition restrictive covenant, non-solicitation restrictive covenant. There's also a restrictive covenant called the non-disparagement and confidentiality. So confidentiality is what it is. You just keep the terms of the agreement confidential. That one's sort of, most people are familiar with that. Non-disparagement means that if anything should happen in the future or post-closing, you won't speak poorly of the purchaser. So the parties just agree to, typically it's not in a sale agreement, but I've seen it once or twice. Typically it is employment agreement related covenants. But anyways, the meat and potatoes here are the non-competition, non-solicitation. So a lot of folks say to me, Jordan, I thought a non-competition restrictive covenant is prohibited in the province of Ontario, and that is correct. It is correct only in the case of an employment relationship, employer-employee relationship. That is not correct in the case of a sale of a business. And as we're dealing with the sale of a business in this instance, a non-competition restrictive covenant is enforceable. So they prohibit it from employment agreements, but they allow it in a sale of a business. And the reason for that is because the courts decided it's in the best interest of the public to not have somebody sell their business, go across the street, and open up a competing clinic. So what is a non-competition restrictive covenant? It's basically a covenant that it has three things. It says, number one, within a certain radius and a certain time period and a certain style of business, you won't compete. So within 5 kilometers in 2 years, you won't open up another clinic. That is enforceable in this instance. A non-solicitation is also enforceable. So soliciting is myself physically approaching you, Don, and saying, hey, I sold my clinic, I moved up the street, come follow me. that is, those either relates to customers, non-solicitation. You won't solicit customers. You won't solicit other employees. So often you can't do that post-closing, and that again is enforceable. So what these agreements will contain is a non-competition, again, a certain radius. You can't open a business and compete, and a non-solicitation, which is I won't approach you and solicit you to come to my new clinic after I leave the current one, either as a client or as a former employee.
Okay. Have you seen, have you seen people actually do they agree to these covenants, but then they go, kind of thinking, okay. And are these covenants actually, before I can ask that question, are these in the purchasing agreement and not in the MOU?
Yeah, so they are in the purchase agreement. They can be touched on in the letter of intent. Of course, typically it says you'll agree to restrictive covenants, but it's a one-liner, one sentence. They would be in the purchase agreement or in a document related to it, and it would have almost always would have a non-competition, non-solicitation. And absolutely, I've seen cases all the time. I mean, acting for independent veterinarians, most of the time I get calls of, okay, I sold my clinic a few years ago. What can I do now? Or I have an idea, I want to do this thing. Is that permissible? And the answer is the lawyer's two favorite words, and those are it depends. And we have to read the covenant. We have to see what it says. And if you're, way outside the territory, and there's no chance you're going to be talking to any of your former customers or employees, often the answer is yes. If you're inside the territory and you want to open a similar business, then the answer is probably no. And then, somewhere in between, maybe you want to open a mobile clinic, then we'd have to really hone into, become a mobile vet, hone into what does the covenant say? And then all of a sudden, take a really close look. So I get those calls a lot. Have I seen individuals breach them? Absolutely. I had two partners split up, and the partner that left went back, and he was physically calling clients of the clinic and having them transfer to his new clinic. Actually, it was worse than that. He had a friend on the inside that was referring clients to his new clinic, and we absolutely had to shut it down. So that was not a good news story. Most of the time, people comply with these. You really don't want the aggravation post closing, but I've seen all kinds of stuff. I've also seen former owners take out an ad and put it in front of the old clinic, and basically an advertisement on a park bench for his new clinic. And it all kinds of stuff, but we typically shut them down, and typically these aren't breached. And the common conversations are, I'm thinking about doing this thing. Can I do it within the bounds of what I've signed? That's the typical conversation.
Check. I was hesitant to ask that question because I was wondering, would people really breach after the fact they went over an MOU and a purchase agreement? But if there are certain scenarios, perhaps, when it comes to a separation of a partnership and you don't necessarily, go on the good intentions.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Jordan, what are the trends that you're seeing in the market for practice sales in 2026, and how are they impacting valuations as well as deal structures?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. So in 2026, I mean, look, 5 years ago, it was absolutely bonkers with the amount of activity in this space, especially the number of corporate roll-ups in the veterinary space. As many of us are now well aware, that has stopped. And so where, some corporate consolidators would buy 120 clinics in a year. Now they want to buy 10. And often, in fact, many of those same corporate consolidators have paused for many years really to focus on operations and frankly weren't buying for a while. So we went from a period in 21 and 22, well, really 20 through 22, of absolutely off the charts activity to then the complete polar opposite, a 180 there where there was very little corporate activity. And now we're seeing corporations come back online and start buying again. We're seeing new entrants to Canada in terms of potential corporations that want to come by. Not many, but it's really, there's a number of factors. Number one, as to why the activity still is a bit light in terms of corporate consolidation. And number one, it's corporations learned, and they learned, from their past experience, what the right number of transactions and really, they want a longer service. They want a longer get to know you period. They want a longer transaction. They want to ensure the same three things work on their end: culture, fit, partnership. And what we're also seeing is now there's not 100% sale. Now there's always what's called a joint venture. So that means the selling veterinarian will continue to own up to 49% of the practice. We're seeing a requirement to stay on for at least 3 years. Often during COVID, it was, you could stay on for 1 year. That is long gone. And that is really to ensure that the vendor remains invested and the clinic remains successful. We saw instances during COVID where there was no requirement, there was no ownership requirement, and the veterinarian had to work for a year. They close on day one. On day two, they call in sick. And on day three, they say, I'm on permanent sick leave and I'm not coming back. So that, corporations really learned from that. So now you've got to stay on with respect to share ownership of the clinic. So it'd be called a joint venture, and also a longer term of employment. But again, there's less transactional activity on the corporate side. On the owner to associate side, we're seeing a lot more activity, and that's great because I love independent veterinarians, and I love seeing practices succeed in a more traditional manner where a new veterinarian purchases it from an existing vet. And so we're seeing a lot more of that activity. And that's great. And the deals are just different. The multiples are lower, but that's not a bad thing. Banks only lend so much money, but it doesn't have as many challenges as well, because again, the owner might not need to stay on for as long. If the current owner wants to retire, you've got a new vet coming in and there's a more natural transition, and that current owner can retire more quickly. So we're seeing a back to basics associate to owner transition again, which didn't exist 5 years ago. And we're seeing corporate reemerge, but with a very different strategy, much more learned, controlled strategy, acquiring fewer clinics, but high quality ones.
Gotcha. Now, Jordan, before we wrap up the podcast here, I would love to get a key takeaway from you, perhaps the golden nugget of this conversation for our practice owners listening in, and they are considering on selling their practice, down the horizon, really. Yeah.
I think the key takeaway is honestly hire the right team. Hire a team that has experience doing it, that knows what's acceptable, where you can get your wins, and also focus on tax. Tax tail wags the dog. Put as much cash in your pocket as you can. And with the right team, they'll not only maximize tax, but they'll ensure a smooth transition and a stress-free transition for you off into the sunset. So it's the team and tax are the two sort of takeaways here.
Amazing. Thank you, Jordan, for sharing your insights and expertise with us here today. One of the biggest takeaways from today's conversation is successful selling of a veterinary practice isn't just about agreeing on price. It's about understanding what truly drives that value, putting the right legal and financial structures in place, and protecting the people and legacy that make your practice unique. For many practice owners, the challenge isn't just selling, it's preparing the business in a way that maximizes buyer appeal, supports a smooth transition, and ensures the years of hard work invested in the practice are fully recognized. So if you want a position of your veterinary practice for a more profitable and less stressful sale, it starts with taking intentional steps right now, strengthening your financial clarity, organizing your legal foundations, and building a transition plan that benefits your team and clients. If you're ready to take that next step, you can schedule a free customized consultation with Lila and her team at www.veterinarybusinessinstitute.com/MSM. That's www.veterinarybusinessinstitute.com/MSM. And if you're interested in working with Jordan and his team, Jordan, where can the people find you?
Yeah, great question. You can find me at jmorelli@linmac.com, or just Google LINMAC and go to our veterinary law page. That's LINMAC.com. Go to our veterinary law page and you'll see this face there, and it'll take you right to me.
Absolutely. Well, Jordan, thank you so much. And to everyone listening, I'm Don Adeesha. It has been my pleasure. Until next time, take care, everyone.